Okay, everyone, welcome back. All right, this is going to be the final chapter in Unit 1. This is Chapter 4 on the Arab-Israeli Wars. So we'll really be talking about the collapse of um, Gamal Abdel Nasser's regime in Egypt, the sort of 6 Days War, and then the 1973 Arab War, and then the rise and death of Anwar Sadat in Egypt. And then I'm going to post two supplemental lectures, one on sort of World War One to kind of the revolution in Iran, and then one about pre-World War One to modern Israel. Okay, so chapter 4. We talked about last time Nasser is sort of collapsing, right? The war isn't going well. He sort of turns toward foreign policy and pan-Arabism. And you see Sadat rising up through the ranks of the military, and he'll eventually become Nasser's vice president. The Middle East is becoming sort of even more involved, at least tangentially, in the Cold War. The US and the Allied side, including Great Britain, France, etc., are trying to stake their claim and build, I guess, cooperative relationships in the region. On the other side is the Soviets trying to do the same. I don't know that the Middle East was ever the most important spot on earth that they were concerned about, but everybody was trying to build alliances this time. Eisenhower steps in after the Brits and the French are forced out after landing on Egypt's territory. And offers up sort of a U.S. financial package to ally your state with the U.S. And offers up almost $500 million to any Arab state that'll sign up. And basically, no one signs up. Lebanon is the only state that sort of signs the agreement. Things between sort of Syria and the U.S. at this point are getting pretty testy. So this is the late 60s into the 70s. Syria is highly Nasserist, right? And they have what's called the Rising Ba'ath Party. The Ba'ath Party was highly involved in sort of the Iraq War, in Syria, some touching in Yemen. The CIA tries to overthrow Syria with sort of an underground coup attempt. But it got discovered. And so Syria freaks out. Turkey starts to amass troops on the Syrian border to help out the US. The Soviets eventually force the Turks to back down, right? They're enemies, they're bordering each other, and there are territorial disputes. Syria during this time is going through remarkable political instability. And this means not only a whole bunch of sort of presidential turnovers and elections, but also military coups. There were a lot of them during this time. It still tends to be a bit of a problem in some of these areas in the Middle East, like Yemen, Syria, the power of Hamas in Palestine and Hezbollah uh, in Lebanon. And eventually, Syria the Baathists ask Egypt to sort of join their territory and become a pan-Arab state, right? And so they create what's called the UAR, the United Arab Republic. It is created in 1958, and Nasser is its leader. It starts to go through some real collapses, right? The UAR was a short-lived project, and there are states rolling in and out, and it kind of looks different all the time. In 1961, at least the Egypt-Syria version collapses. The Baathists overthrow the Syrian government and declare independence. Yemen leaves the mix, and Yemen devolves into civil war. And Egypt sort of inserts itself into Yemen to try and ease the situation. And arguably, there's a proxy war going on there between Nasser's Egypt and the Saud royal family and the Saudis backing the rebels or whatever you want to call it, right? And, it still looks remarkably similar today. Yemen has always been a trouble spot in modern Middle Eastern history. They are currently in a civil war for 15 years or so. And the Saudis basically are the US's proxy. We sell them a whole bunch of military equipment, including our best jet fighters, and they use that equipment to sort of quell the rebellion in Yemen. Okay, let's see. Section 4.3, the 1967 Six Days War. So the Fedayeen, had been carrying out little excursions from Palestinian territories and the surrounding countries into Israel, sort of like Hamas October 7, but nowhere near that level, right? Just sort of sporadic little attacks, killing civilians, killing soldiers, these sorts of things. Israel starts to get pissed off and lashes out at Syria and shoots down 6 of their jet fighters over their own territory. Nasser and Egypt are very ill prepared at this point. They had been bogged down in a Yemeni civil war for years. Their military is starting to become depleted. The morale is low, right? And so Nasser sort of puts himself in a trap, the way that the book describes it, at least, in through his sort of bellicose rhetoric and his claims that the military was doing well and is strong and all of these things. So he he marches troops toward Israel as signaling, though from what we know he had no intention of attacking, and he blockades some of Israel's ships. And a couple other states start announcing their willingness to join against Israel. And Israel's like, to hell with this, and they strike first. A lot of their sort of national military strategy is based on surprise attacks, first mover advantage, these sorts of things, because they're a smaller state and they're surrounded by enemies, arguably. And Israel decimates Egypt's air force in 2 days, like basically blows up every plane they have. They take the entire Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, including the Suez Canal, which is like Egypt's lifeblood economically. On day 4, they take the West Bank from Jordan. On day 5, they take the Golan Heights from Syria, north of them. Excuse me, not north of them. And then the Arab states quit basically on day 6. They're like, we've just taken a drubbing. It's incredibly humiliating yet again for Nasser, because he said he was going to come in after the former collapse in the 1948 war and fix the military and bring Egypt back to glory. But this was a humiliating defeat. Israel has again expanded their borders, right? And they take the Sinai Peninsula, which is enormous, at least relative to Israel, and the Suez Canal, right? And they basically take control of the canal. And at this point, Pan Arabism basically all but dies. It arguably lasted from the turn of the century, 1900s, and Hussein Ali documents until pretty much the 6 Days War. And at that point, like the entire thing just starts to collapse. Israel eventually withdraws from Sinai in 1982, but they keep much of the rest of the territory. Eventually, the Golan Heights will change hands for a very short while, but Israel will take it back. And they continue to spread, Israel continues to spread not only through conflict, as you'll notice, there's a trend that they sort of expand their territory every time, but also through their sort of settlement project, where the very, arguably the extremists from Israel are the ones sort of spreading out illegally by international law into the settlements in West Bank, Gaza, etc. All right, so we wrap up the 1967 Six Days War, and a very short time later, we get the 1973 Arab Israeli War, or the Ramadan War, or the Yom Kippur War. It sort of depends on which side you're on. And this is sort of where Sadat starts to rise, right? Sadat doesn't have a whole lot of connections. He becomes Nasser's vice president, I think around 1967. Nasser's out by 1970 and dies very shortly thereafter. And Sadat, the argument is to be made, and this is very indicative of dictatorships, is that they sort of keep those in high positions around them relatively weak, right? So that there is not a coup attempt or something like that. And so this is something that you see in Putin's Russia quite often, is this sort of continuous rolling through of administrative positions and high level leadership and military leadership, etc., so that like a cult of personality can't be built around someone and they can't make as many networking connections as they would need to later overthrow the state, right? And in a sense, this is Anwar Sadat. He's weak. He's not very charismatic. He's kind of wonky. He's not very attractive, arguably. I remember there's a funny movie from like 15 years ago where the guy names his little pug dog Anwar Sadat. And the guy is like, "Why'd you name him that?" And he says, "Just look at him. It looks exactly like him." And it always stuck in my brain for some reason. Okay, so Sadat is someone attempts to kill him in 1971. And at this point, Sadat himself starts putting in the sort of purges and repression tactics that we saw under Nasser. um, During this period of sort of the early 70s, they're carrying out what's called the War of Attrition. They're trying to ensure, the Egyptians are trying to ensure that Egypt can't set up a defensive position and just outright take the Sinai and the Suez Canal. So they're always sort of putting pressure on them, little small attacks, etc., because they desperately need the Suez, right? This is their main economic driver outside of like the Nile agricultural region. There still to this day is not all that much economic activity or I don't know, industry, etc. So Suez is very important to them. At the same time, the USSR is propping up Egypt's military. Right, they're rebuilding their air force, which had just been destroyed in the Six Days War. They're training on new technology and stuff like this. They're also doing training on sort of door to door warfare, right? Which is what we see in a lot of the Middle East because of, especially in the desert region, there's a lot of urbanization, right? And so the war of attrition basically ends in 1970. The U.S., and I think this is Nixon at the time, so Nixon and Anwar Sadat and Golda Meir, who is the prime minister of Israel, all sign an agreement that this is going to end and that some of the Suez will sort of be given back, right? But it never really is followed through on. And Sadat strikes Israel in 1973 during both Ramadan, which is the Muslim holy month, and Yom Kippur, which is a Jewish holy tradition. And interestingly, the Israelis had pretty bad intelligence and thought that like there was no chance of an attack, so they sent everyone home for the holidays and had sort of a skeleton crew defending Sinai. And so Egypt and Syria both attack simultaneously. Egypt retakes the east bank of the Sinai and the Suez Canal. Syria retakes the Golan Heights. And it's a sort of instantaneous, easy victory, surprisingly, right? And because the Israelis weren't prepared. But after 3 days, the Israelis rallied. And a lot of this has to do with the U.S. shipping in constant influx of jets, military equipment, technology, ammunition, all of these sorts of things, right? And Israel retakes the Golan Heights from Syria. They absolutely crush the Syrian military and a lot of their industry, actually, like their economic drivers. And so Syria is in a bad, bad spot after this. And Sadat sort of turns just like Nasser did toward foreign diplomacy, which is a very odd thing from the Egyptian leaders, right? And tries to become, just like Nasser did, the spokesperson, I would say, for Arabism. I don't think it's even pan-Arabism at this point, but Arabism. But he causes some frustrations with a lot of the Arab states because nobody elected this guy to be their spokesman, right? And there was even some frustration at the Camp David Accords when Nixon and Sadat and Prime Minister Begin from Israel all get together at the Camp David in the U.S. and start sort of banging out this idea of a two-state solution. And it really opened the door. This Camp David Accords opened the door for the return of the Sinai to the Egyptians, but it also threw some of the other Arab states under the bus. And arguably, Palestine wasn't front and center for Saddam. They have to finally shift out of um, the Egyptians have to finally shift out of socialism, right? Socialism had been instituted in the early 60s under Nasser. We're moving into the mid 70s, right? And it's not working. And this is the thing about socialism a lot of the time, especially in some of these less developed countries like Venezuela, for example, right? They took a major shift to socialism under Maduro, sort of just like Egypt did under Nasser. And things tend to go really well for a few years, right? You're very popular. There's consumer spending in the market, all this kind of stuff. The problem is the medium to long term effects, where there's less incentive for your companies to do well, right? There's less incentive for research and development or reinvestment into your company, right? There were also problems in the Venezuelans and in part the Egyptians were reliant on sort of resources, right? Oil in Venezuela. And when the price dropped outside the $90 mark or so, they just couldn't afford the social spending that they were putting out into their country, right? And so you really start to see the cracks appear after, I don't know, 6 to 10 years, where socialism looks like this shining, wonderful thing and increases your popularity and all of this stuff, right? But eventually the cracks start to appear. And this is sort of what happened in Egypt as well. And so they turn toward corporatism, um, basically propping up the private market. It causes the economy to collapse in a sense, right? A major transition toward another economic system is difficult, will always cause issues, right? Even if the long term is positive. Hunger is rising, inflation is rising in their society as there's currency manipulation, and etc. And so Sadat is assassinated in the very early 1980s in 1981. And I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to pop up the Iran and the Israel pieces, and that'll be the end of Unit 1. So we've gotten up until about the Iranian Revolution or so, and then we'll pick it up there in the next unit. All right. I appreciate everyone's time. I hope you're having a great day. Thanks for being here.